Thank you, Samantha. And I trust that everyone can see my slides and you can hear me fine. Great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a brief introduction to CAR-T, basically explain a little bit about how it's used today, and then get into some questions remaining about this type of treatment and ongoing research. And I want to be clear right from the get-go that I am not a medical professional. My background is in education, but I have been working in hematology for a very long time. So my role here is to try to simplify and help you understand some of the complexities of CAR-T therapy and answer some questions about the patient experience, but not give you medical advice. And so if we look at the current products, there are a number of CAR-T products currently available in acute lymphoblastic leukemia or ALL and different types of lymphomas and also myeloma. But actually for this presentation, I'm just focusing on those that are available to treat leukemia and lymphoma because that's what our organizations do. And with these available CAR-T therapies, the first one entered the market about 5 years ago, which means this is still really a relatively new treatment class. So we're still learning as we go with these therapies. And while all these products may not be available where you live, they are available somewhere in the world, and there are more in clinical trial. And you can see underneath each product the diseases that they can be used for. But I do need to know they are right now approved for patients who have already been treated with other therapies that have failed or the patient has relapsed. So for many indications, the patient has to have been treated with at least 2 other therapies before they can be offered CAR-T. So this is not something that patients can jump to right away at this point. And we should also know that all of these cancers are cancers that come from B cells or B lymphocytes, which is a type of white blood cell. And if we look, why is that particular piece of information important? So acute lymphoblastic leukemia or ALL, lymphoma, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, all share lymph somewhere in their names. And it means when the blood cells are developing, these cancers come from the same line of lymphoid cells that only develop into certain types of white blood cells. And white blood cells play a really important role in your immune system functioning well. So CAR-T therapy currently only works where B cells or B lymphocytes are cancerous. That's where the current products are aimed. B cells are an important part of your immune system as they help identify any foreign cells or things that shouldn't be there so other parts of the immune system can destroy them and get rid of them. Ideally, that's what it should be happening. And this can be done in response to something new entering your body, like a bacteria or a virus, or your immune system can also remember a virus you had in the past and can trigger a new immune response if it comes back. So these foreign cells can also be called antigens, which comes up when we look at what CAR-T actually means. So T cells are also a part of the body's immune system, and T cells are a type of white blood cell that attack those virus-infected cells or foreign cells, and truthfully, cancer cells when the immune system is working properly. And so they also produce a substance, by the way, that helps control the immune response so it doesn't over-respond or under-respond to a threat. So often T cells are reliant on B cells doing their job and identifying the foreign cells so they know they should kill them. So basically, B cells are going over here, and the T cells come and destroy it. But when you have a cancer that's affecting your B cells or your B lymphocytes, these normal processes don't work. So the T cells don't necessarily know what they should be doing. So when we're looking at CAR-T, we are looking at those 2 types of cells, are involved in this process. So to help with our understanding, let's look at what the words in chimeric antigen T cell receptor therapy or CAR-T actually mean, because they're not common words that we might hear a lot. And I'm not going to discuss these in order, but I'm actually going to start with the T as I think it frames the discussion better. And so the T in CAR-T refers to T cells, which we just discussed what they normally do. So CAR T therapy enhances the effectiveness of these T cells. It makes them work better than they could without. And then next is for, we look at the C, it's for chimeric, and chimeric means having parts of different origins coming together. So in this case, a T cell has different genes added into it that normally wouldn't be in a patient's T cell. So that's what's happening with that chimeric word. Antigen, we just mentioned, those are substances that you would find in your immune system that are foreign or shouldn't be there. So if everything is working properly, the immune system destroys those and gets rid of them. In these types of cancer, that doesn't work as it should. So the T cells in CAR T are reprogrammed to recognize the cancer cells or the antigens. And we actually do that by bringing in the R, which is, the receptor cell there. And I don't know why that didn't come in. So let me just do this. There we go. And that brings us there to this receptor. And what that is something on the surface of a cell that binds or connects with something on a different cell. And in CAR T, the T cells are modified to develop a very specific receptor on their surface that binds them to a protein found on the surface of a B cell. And if we go back to the beginning of my presentation, the B cells are what are involved in your cancer actually developing in acute leukemia, acute lymphoid leukemia, and lymphomas, and in chronic lymphocytic leukemia. So what we're doing then is we're making sure those T cells can connect to the cancer cells by looking for that surface protein called CD19, which is what is the program or what they're designed to look for in current therapies, okay? So why do we need to do this? Why doesn't the immune system work properly in the first place? And cancer cells are really smart, and they figure out ways to evade or hide from the T cells and prevent the natural immune system response from happening. So if T cells aren't able to recognize the cancer, they can't destroy it. So CAR T, when we look at it, is something that we would call an immunotherapy. So a type of therapy or treatment that helps the patient's own immune system fight the disease. And it's also gene therapy, where cells are genetically altered or modified to help them fight cancer. So this is a therapy that modifies a patient's T cells to better detect and destroy the cancer cells, so that a role that they already had in the immune system but weren't doing very well. And a genetic change is made to the patient's own T cells so they can develop that new way of recognizing the cancer cells. Now that's done by using an inactive virus that actually brings the receptor or the gene into the T cell so it can develop that new receptor on the surface. Those inactive viruses aren't going to make the patient sick. All they do is allow that process to happen. And then the modified T cells now can see and identify the B cells and destroy them. So right now, how this process happens is the available CAR T products are something we would call autologous, meaning that they use the patient's own T cells. So a patient undergoes a process called leukapheresis or apheresis, where the patient's blood is removed through one arm. The blood passes through a machine that separates the white blood cells out, and then the remaining blood goes back into the patient in their other arm. So the patient only has their white blood cells missing. And those collected white blood cells are prepared and sent to a lab where they are modified so they can become these CAR cells. And so then they're able to recognize the CD19 receptor on those B cells. Now, when that part has been done, then they are multiplied significantly. So there are millions of these cells now, and they're prepared and sent back to the hospital where the patient is being treated. Now, there are a limited number of labs that can do this type of work because it is a very specialized process. And when the cells are returned to the hospital and reinfused in the patient, many patients say that this seems really anticlimactic. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm having CAR T. This is so incredible. And so overwhelming. I can't believe this. And then they end up with this little bag of cells being infused back in, and they're like, that's it? Yep, that's it. And then there's a lot of waiting. So you're just waiting to see if the cells are going to work, but also waiting to see if you're going to develop any side effects that need to be managed. And so when we're talking about the side effects of CAR T, there are two that we are most often discussed due to the potential severity of these. And the first is cytokine release syndrome, or CRS. Cytokines are normally released into your body during an immune response, as they help control the level of that response. So it's normal that they are there when the T cells come in and they're doing their job and they're getting rid of the cancer cells. The problem is how many of them are released into the body at one time. If you remember, in this process, the T cells are multiplied significantly. So you have more T cells than you normally would have in your body. And so with that, there can be some issues. In some cases, this can be quite serious and can make people very, very ill. But doctors, because we've been doing this process for a little bit now, have learned a lot more about CRS and are really good at watching for signs and symptoms that it's starting, so they can try and treat it early so it doesn't become severe. So signs and symptoms can include things like a high fever or nausea, or lots of fatigue, or you get chills, or some redness and swelling sometimes in some people. In severe cases, it can cause things like heart failure and heart arrhythmias, or other organ failure, and it can be life-threatening. But like I said, in most cases now, doctors have learned how to recognize it early, and then they treat it with steroids that help lower that immune response. So they're playing a balancing act to make sure that the cytokine release syndrome isn't going to be a problem, but they don't want all those T cells to disappear either. And so that's what's happening. They do a lot of checks on our patients to make sure they're okay. And the second is immune effector immune effector cell-associated neurotoxicity syndrome, or ICANS. Usually we just call it neurotoxicity. So for some reason, CAR T cells can impact the brain function, and the signs of this can be quite subtle, or they can be very obvious. So for instance, patients may not be able to find the right words, but some can't talk at all. Or they think they're putting an understandable sentence together, but they're talking complete gibberish. Their handwriting may look different, or they just can't figure out how to use their hand, right? They may have a hard time remembering facts, or seriously, some people can have seizures. So the variety of symptoms can be quite wide ranging. And depending on the symptoms, the patients are treated. Now, normally these issues pass within a short time frame, but they can persist in rare cases. So it's just something that we watch. Now, while the doctors like to talk about these symptoms a lot, there are lots of other side effects that patients actually experience that can also be troubling. And I'm sure our patients here will have some of that information they'll be willing to share today. But B-cell aplasia is one thing. So the CAR T cells can't distinguish between the cancer cells and the really healthy normal B cells that your immune system needs. So they're killing all the B cells. So B-cell aplasia just means you don't have any B cells. Because of that, you don't have an active or effective immune system, and then you're potentially open to getting a lot of infections and viruses and other things. And of course, that can impact a patient's quality of life. Other things can happen that patients think are really concerning, like a lot of weight loss or skin reactions, right? Some redness and itching and things like that. People talk about persistent brain fog, like they can't work the same job they used to because their mind or brain isn't working the way it used to. These things, again, usually resolve over time, but they can still have a good, significant impact on somebody's quality of life. Now, when you look at medical presentations, a typical patient pathway to getting CAR T looks like this, and it's very linear and very simple. And we have patients speaking about their own experience. So I won't get into this too in depth, but only to say, while this seems very straightforward, the actual pathway can be really messy, and oftentimes it more resembles something like this. Because there's a whole lot of stuff going on. Patients are dealing with the emotional and side effects of impact of having a disease that so far has not responded to treatment. And this often CAR T is given as a last ditch attempt, or it's how it's often phrased, or by the time you get to CAR T. And so there's a lot of pressure on this working that can cause a lot of added stress. As well, you're dealing with the side effects of the treatments you had in the past. And so you're not feeling well. If your disease is progressing, you have the symptoms of the cancer itself, which is hard to manage. And then you have the new side effects from CAR T itself. So this is quite messy time. And you may also be dealing with a new hospital team or new care team, which of course can also cause you some stress and anxiety. So we still need some new research. CAR T works, and it has great promise, and it works well for a number of people, but it doesn't work for everybody yet. And it's received lots of positive media over the years. And so for some people, they are going into long-lasting permanent remissions, and other people still relapse from their CAR T. So it doesn't work for everybody the way that we had hoped. There are reasons for this sometimes. You know, patients by the time they get to CAR T are very ill. And we do know patients who are more fit do better. T cells can be in poor shape by the time the person gets to CAR T and has those cells removed, so they're not the best to multiply. Some patients have a time-limited response, so it works for a while, but then they need another therapy like a stem cell transplant or something to get them into actually having a cure. And so from that, it really means that we need to look at research in different areas. So some of the things we're looking at, the current therapies, as we mentioned, are all looking for that CD19 marker on the surface of a cell. Maybe we need to develop CAR Ts that have a different marker that they're looking to find. So there's research looking at that. Maybe CAR T would be more effective if there was more than one surface marker they were attaching to, so 2 receptors or more. So there's research looking at that. We're just also looking at using, instead of T cells, natural killer cells, which are also a different part of the immune system and have a similar role. So those are happening, as well as off-the-shelf or allogeneic CAR T cells, which means they're using donor cells, so you don't have to wait for your cells to be manufactured. We are looking at using CAR T cells in other tumor types, other cancers. We're looking at using them in earlier lines, so would they be more effective if you'd had less of that, you know, nasty chemotherapy up front. And we're also, there's research looking into producing CAR T cells that have less side effects. So how do we make this more manageable experience for our patients? But there's still things that we need to do. We need to figure out who is the best patient or the right patient to get CAR T, so we're not putting people through a therapy that isn't going to work for them. We really have to look at that manufacturing time. Is there a way to shorten this so patients get the therapy quicker and we're not having to deal with that bridging therapy or the that time while we're waiting for that manufacturing that can be weeks. When you have a very ill patient, it's hard to make sure that they're staying healthy enough to receive CAR T cells during that time. Of course, short and long-term effects of the therapy and how they impact quality of life. The therapy is still quite new. At this point, registry data is really important. So patients, please make sure your data is getting included in a registry so we can really identify what are issues and make sure future patients are better prepared to handle those. And of course, the durability, making sure that we find the best patients who are going to have a long-lasting remission from this therapy. And if that can't happen, what their next therapy is going to be, so that we can make sure everybody stays alive and healthy. And that is it for me for right now.
Thanks, Lorna. So as mentioned before, if there are any questions, feel free to post the questions or in the discussion or in the Q&A, and we will address those questions afterwards. Thanks, Chad. So who wants to go next, Keris or Sophie?
I can go, that's fine.
Okay. So
let me share my screen.
Yeah, you can see that.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So hello everyone, my name is Keris Thompson, and I'll talk to you about my still fairly recent experience with CAR T. So let's move along. So a bit of background about me. So I was diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in October 2020. So pandemic year, I'd say right towards the end, but obviously it's continued on, but already quite a difficult year for a lot of people. I didn't have any symptoms other than I felt some pressing on my throat for a couple of weeks, and eventually went to the doctors when it started to, I started to get a lump here. Very, very quickly, actually, I got diagnosed within 2 weeks as having lymphoma. So I think I caught it pretty early on, which I think has helped me throughout the entire experience. Because I don't have any children, I was referred immediately to actually have my eggs frozen, embryos frozen, simply because they said to me straight from the off that the chemotherapy that I would be having would be really intense, and it would affect my hormones and potentially fertility. So that happened very quickly. So from being diagnosed straight into fertility clinic, and then a couple of days after that went for chemotherapy. So I had 6 cycles of R-CHOP. After 4 cycles, I had a scan to be told that 70% had actually disappeared, because it was literally just around here. So initially I was classed as stage 1, and then because of I suppose looking into the detail a bit more, they actually said I was stage 2 because it was on my thyroid and the lymph node next to it. But that was all it was. And they said 70% had gone after 4 cycles of R-CHOP. So I had the following 2 cycles, had my scan ready to be told, oh, you're all done. But I was actually told you're right back to where you started. It actually grown back during those 2 cycles. So I got put onto a pathway for stem cell transplant. And for that, they said, oh, you'll move on to R-ICE, which is even more intense than R-CHOP. So they said, you'll do 3 cycles of that, and then we'll refer you for stem cell transplant. I had 2 cycles of R-ICE, and was told, actually, you've not responded at all. It hadn't grown, but it hadn't gone down. So I had the 3rd one for fun, whilst they worked out what to do, and they started talking about CAR T, which I had already read about, and secretly I was actually quite pleased to be going on the CAR T pathway rather than the stem cell, from what I had read and from what I'd seen on Facebook groups and stuff as well. So I was rooting for CAR T straight from the off, and I was approved for CAR T in the July. So if I move on, as Lorna said, so by this point, you're quite knackered. I'd already been through a lot of injections, a lot of self-injections, a lot of treatment, and through the pandemic. So we had shielded, me and my husband, to this point all by ourselves. I'd gone through 99% of this by myself because he's not allowed with me to anything. And by this point, I met UCLH, who told me, you know, this is your last chance of being cured. And actually, you've only got a 30 to 40% success rate. So it's quite scary. You then get given this form to sign that says pretty much what Lorna said. These are all the side effects you could have. You could end up in intensive care. You could die. But if you don't do this, you could die anyway. So it's quite a lot. And I was on my own. So it's a lot to take in. But But I was also weirdly excited. And for anyone who does read my blog, I have quite a weird sense of humour, and I was quite excited to be given the opportunity to have this treatment. My mother-in-law actually passed away from DLBCL back in 2011 when stem cells were being trialled. So the fact that, you know, stem cell therapy has moved on, and now you've got to CAR T therapy, I was quite excited to be given that opportunity. So I went for cell collection. So I put the photos on here. I actually had my cells collected through a vas cath through my groin. And the reason being, so UCLH follow that approach because the vein is bigger, and then you've not got two lines in both arms. So I could eat and drink, I could read my book. Whereas I know that other hospitals, they do the arms, but the machine can stop working. So it's not the most pleasant, like having it put in, but once it's in, you're fine. But you have to lay there for 4 to 6 hours whilst it's being collected. So I think I went for about 6 wees beforehand because I did not want. They said, oh, if you need a wee in the middle, that we've got to come and help you. I was like, nope, not doing that. So I had that, and then, as Lorna said, you have then what's called bridging therapy. So I had 4 weeks between my cells, or my super soldiers, as I called them, were sent off to Amsterdam for training. So I then had radiotherapy for a week. And then I went back to UCLH ready to prepare for CAR T. So you have 3 days of lymphodepleting chemotherapy. They call it light therapy, light chemotherapy. It's not, it's just, they're not trying to attack the cancer. They're just trying to make room for your new CAR T cells. So you have 3 days of that, again, on your own. I just remember feeling very, very tired. And I stayed up in London in the UCLH hospital hotel. So you have 3 days, and you have 2 days of rest, and then you move on to CAR T, which is known as day 0. So I put the big case, this massive case gets rolled in, and they open it up, and all this like magic fog comes out, and it looks really exciting. And then the smallest bag comes out with your super soldiers. And I had prepared a playlist of all, you know, super music from Avengers and Marvel, and to really gear me up. And I didn't even get through one song because it's over in a couple of minutes. And then you do wait. So I sat there and waited to be moved to the ward. I then got my own room. And I think it took a couple of days for anything to happen. And it started off with, oh, your temperature's gone up. You're 38.5 now. So, oh, that's exciting. And then it went down, and then it went up again. And then suddenly it was 40. I was like, okay, something's definitely happening. So I had fever. I've never had a fever before in my life. I didn't know what to expect, but I had fever, sweating, shivering. I had headache, obviously fatigue. And this was the only time in my entire cancer journey that I lost my appetite. They all laughed at me at the hospital. I would always be sitting there eating. But during my fever, I did 2 days of no appetite. So my husband thought, oh God, you are ill then. You've actually stopped eating. But that came back quickly, and I carried on eating again. I swelled up, as you can see on the photo. So I remember calling the nurse and going, oh, my neck's swollen. She went, don't you normally look like that? No, I don't. And it continued to swell. Until they actually gave me some antibiotics, and it started to go down again, and then the fever started to come down, which was lovely. I did experience neurotoxicity. My husband thought it was hilarious. So again, because it was COVID, he could only visit twice a week, so we were talking all the time on video call. And there was one day my hand started having pins and needles, and then he phoned me and he said, it's like you're drunk. I couldn't quite speak to him. My text messages, it was like I was drunk and texting him. But I was passing all the tests. So every day you do a handwriting test, as Lorna said. You have to write the same thing every day. I passed that. They point things around the room. I passed all of that. But I said to them, but I'm not right. I know I'm not right. And yeah, it was just like being drunk for a couple of hours, and then I snapped out of it, and I phoned my husband. I said, oh, what happened there? And he said, oh, you just kept asking what day it was. Oh, okay. And then from that moment on, the rest of the experience for me was quite boring in hospital, because then it's just checks. The observations every 4 hours is hard. Throughout the night, you're trying to recover and you're being woken up every 4 hours, middle of the night, for blood pressure and temperature. So after 2 weeks, I got moved back to the hospital hotel, and I could actually sleep. I could go for a walk. It took me a while to build. It's amazing how quickly you decondition. So actually, and I remember this guy overtaking me with his Zimmer frame because I couldn't walk that fast. But over time, you build that up. And by the end of the 2 weeks out of hospital, I was walking around Regent's Park, which was lovely. You have your scan before you go home, which showed complete response already after 28 days. And then at 90 days, I was told I'm classed as in remission. I have been told by UCLH, if you are showing complete response post 4 months, then it is very, very unlikely for you to relapse. I think they're looking at 2% have relapsed past that point. I've been having regular calls with them since, and blood tests since. I'm off of all my medication. I'm back at work. It's like it never happened. And obviously now that we're coming out of the pandemic as well, it just means the whole experience was very surreal. So I did write it all in a blog, which I put the link there. I know Samantha mentioned it as well. If anyone is really interested. Of the sticker chart, I haven't mentioned that. I did a sticker every day in hospital just to make the days go quickly. But all of that is in my blog. And yeah, everything, I feel very much back to normal. I'm back doing exercise. I'm going on holiday next month. So it's just nice to share this experience with others. And obviously, if anyone's got any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Caris. Sophie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Caris, you have really put me to shame. I haven't prepared a presentation, so I'm just going to talk at you guys. So yeah, it's quite strange actually, the timing of this webinar. So this time 4 years ago, I was in fact in hospital waiting to be diagnosed. So tomorrow I would have got the news that I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I was only 20 when I was diagnosed. I'd only just turned 20. I was part way through doing my undergraduate degree in biology. So my symptoms were very vague. It was just headaches and a sore neck. So initially it was put down to, you know, being tired from uni and exams and things like that. So when the headaches didn't seem to go away, I went to the GP, and because of being a student and things like that, he was concerned about meningitis, which was the original reason for me being referred to A&E. And after many, many tests, including a bone marrow biopsy that I didn't even know what one was, they diagnosed me. This was at my local hospital. So they immediately moved me to a hospital in Birmingham called the Queen Elizabeth, which is a really good hospital, because they have something called a teenage cancer trust unit, where you go up to the age of 24 for any treatment if you're within that age bracket. So I was immediately enrolled onto a trial called UCAL 2011, which is pretty standard treatment for ALL. But unfortunately, after that first 28 days, I didn't really respond. So then they started sort of, you know, upping the ante a little bit and giving me a few extra bits and bobs. But those extra bits and bobs also weren't really making the cut for me. So that was when we started talking about stem cell transplant. And I ended up having one. I had it in the November, which was, I always say it was probably one of the most horrendous times ever. Transplant is really, really not nice. And yeah, very bad times. So anyway, I had the transplant. I was really ill. Lost quite a lot of weight after that because of the mucositis. I had it quite bad. And, you know, standard protocol, I had my bone marrow biopsy done again after 100 days. But I got asked to go in for another one, for another biopsy, and I thought, like, why are they asking me to have a repeat? And I had a few friends who we'd all gone through transplant at the same time, and I got in touch with them and I said, have any of you like been told that you need to go back in? And they were like, no. And I just had no idea. And I was just like, oh, okay. Went in, had it done. I was a bit under the weather, so I was in and out of clinic anyway. And then I went in one day and my doctor just looked at me and he was like, I'm really sorry, but you've relapsed. And at that moment, I was just like, okay, chemo then. Just trying to sort of, you know, brush it off. And he just kind of looked at me and said, I don't think chemo's really going to touch you now. And that's when you get that sudden moment of realization that this is really serious. And my doctor mentioned to me, like, you know what CAR T is, don't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, and you know how expensive it is and all the things around it. And I was like, yes. And he said, I think that will probably be what we need to go forward with. And at that moment, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital where I was treated wasn't actually registered as a treatment centre at that moment. But my doctor, bless him, he pushed and got it sorted out so that I didn't have to, you know, be far away from home to have the treatment done. So we started the process. I was given some information about it. I was quite excited. Being from a scientific background, it was really exciting to me, especially seeing as I'd seen CAR T, you know, get put onto the NHS on the news whilst I was in hospital, like to see that, you know, previously and think that's what I'm going to have. It was quite exciting in that sense. So then that process started. We had the bridging chemo and the collection. My collection was quite traumatic. It did take about 9 hours for my collection. They really struggled with my veins. So I ended up having it through cannulas. So I was a bit battered after that. And then they got sent off to, I think mine went off to New Jersey, to Novartis, and they got manufactured. And by the time I was due back into hospital, it was actually my birthday. So they admitted me on my 21st birthday to have my cells the next day. And I was admitted on the 9th of June and received my cells on the 10th. And that was 3 years ago now. And I remember seeing that little bag and just being like, oh my God, everyone is like so excited. And there were all these doctors coming in to see me because they'd never seen CAR T before. I was the first one in our hospital to have it done. So there was just all this excitement over this bag that was that big. And I sort of had the infusion. I was like, okay, like what now? And my doctor said, we just wait now, wait for the storm to kick in. And I was like, oh, okay. And true to his words, after about 3-4 days, that was when my temperature started picking up and I started getting a bit shaky. And I remember looking at my sister and saying something is happening. And from then it was a bit of a whirlwind. I was experiencing cytokine release syndrome and my blood pressure was extremely low. I felt fine, but it was very, very low. And because they were they ended up having to do my observations pretty much every half an hour. And I wasn't responding to fluids. So they made the decision to send me down to intensive care. Now that was quite funny in itself because they didn't actually send a porter for me, so I ended up walking down there, and I was fine. Like, and when I walked in, people were like, "People don't walk into ICU," and I was like, "I'm fine." So I spent 24 hours in there. That was all fine. I had a couple of doses of tocilizumab, if I haven't butchered that name, and that sorted me out. And after 11 days in total from my infusion, I was discharged, and I was seen in clinic 3 times a week after that for a good while. I was having to have a few platelet top-ups and blood products when I was going into clinic. It took quite a while for my counts to recover. Even a year after my infusion, I still needed a few GCSF injections to top up my neutrophils. But much like Keris, they did my they did the tests. They did a bone marrow biopsy for me after 28 days to see if I'd responded, and it was complete remission. And since then I have remained in remission. So 4 months after my treatment, I actually went back to uni. I finished my degree with a first. I wrote my dissertation on chronic myeloid leukemia. And then I am a bit of a glutton for punishment, so I went back again to do my master's degree in haematology, which I've just got a distinction in, so that's really good. And again, my dissertation was on leukemia. And then I decided, well, I didn't even decide then. I think ever since I was diagnosed, I always knew that I wanted to share my own experiences and also help others who are going through the same as me, because it's so lonely when you get diagnosed, but you soon realise that there's a massive community of patients out there who know exactly how you feel, and we can all validate each other and make each other, you know, feel better and listen to. And that was when I decided to apply for a job with Leukemia Care, and lucky for me, I was successful in that, and I've been working with them now for nearly 5 months. So yeah, that's my story.
Thanks for sharing your story. I think I'm always about to cry, so you know, it really touches me all the time. I think for me, one question would be, because you are both young, very young. So how did that change your life, beside the fact that you had to be off work, off studies? And what did you think was the most difficult in all that experience, in this journey? And yeah, I think that's my first question, actually.
I'll take a stab while Sophie catches her breath. So I was 29 when I got diagnosed, and my birthday was the day that Boris announced that the UK was going back into lockdown, so 4th of January 21. So that was my 30th birthday. I just had cycle 3 of chemo New Year's Eve. And then my 30th birthday, and I do remember thinking, well, this sucks. But selfishly, the world had paused. So, I mean, Sophie had a very different experience being just before COVID. I didn't feel I missed out on too much. No one had done anything in 2020. No one really did anything in 2021. All my friends who were turning 30 missed their 30ths too. I did miss my dad's wedding that summer. He got me remarried, and I couldn't go because I remember speaking to the consultant just before CAR-T to say, well, my dad's getting married, can I go? Because I was planning on going. It was just before cell collection. And he went, no, you can't. If you catch COVID, you might not be able to ever have CAR-T. And it's like, huh? And he went, your dad should move his wedding. I was like, oh, you can tell him. You can tell him that. So I remember summer 21 was quite hard because people were starting to go out again after the pandemic, and I had to go back into lockdown. But similarly, people understood and people kept away. They kept their colds away. So I also felt very protected. I think for me, it did put a pause in my life that I wasn't expecting. So me and my husband had started talking about whether we wanted to start a family. So then to be told, oh, well, actually, you're going to have treatment that could impact fertility. You've got to go through IVF, and you can't even try for children for 2 years after chemo. And now I'm having conversations with the hospital to say, well, what happens now if I want to have a family? How does CAR-T affect that? Will it impact the baby? What if I relapse? So there's all these questions that I never thought I'd have to ask. But then on the other side, I suppose if I hadn't been through this experience, they're not questions that you would normally ponder. Oh, what if I get cancer? So it's probably extra plan. I'm a planner, so it's just extra planning on my side. I think being younger probably did help as well with the treatment. Aside, they would laugh at me, aside from the obvious, I was really fit and healthy. So I didn't have anything else, and I think that really did help. So and now I'm able to spread awareness and do things like this as well, which is always good. So I think that's from my point of view. But Sophie, I don't know, you're a lot younger than I am.
Yeah, I mean, much the same really. It was that at that point where I was diagnosed, it was, you know, I was thinking I'm not going to graduate with my friends. Like, you can't help but think those things at that moment, because those are the things that are important to you when your life changes in that way. And then I think as you go along, you sort of, you know, you adapt and you learn to live with, you know, this new version of yourself that you never thought that you'd have to deal with. So then I remember whilst I was having my conditioning chemo for CAR-T, I sent my friends some drinks through my phone because they were celebrating finishing their exams. So yeah, it's sometimes there were a few bittersweet moments, but you just, you know, you get through it, and as long as you've got a good support network, I think, you know, anything's possible and you can get through it. It's just with COVID and things like that, it was very difficult having to isolate. I've also got the long-term B-cell aplasia and obviously no immunoglobulins as well. I did actually end up with COVID. It did put me in hospital, which was not fun. And then I got it again, but that time wasn't as bad, and thankfully I was able to access some of the new antibody treatments. But yeah, it's just all about, you know, learning to adapt to this new way of living and dealing with the cards that you've been dealt. Unfortunately, it's difficult sometimes, but we get there.
Do you feel you had enough support from your teams, your healthcare teams, or from your families, friends?
Yeah, I feel that there was quite a lot of support. I think the healthcare team were amazing. They were all, you know, very excited that we were going ahead with the treatment and very interested to hear what, you know, my views were, and you know, they were very involved, and they still remain very involved. When I go in for checkups, they're all very much, you know, interested in what I've been doing and how I am and things like that. And obviously, you know, friends and family, massive support, and you know, you can't get through it without those people being there.
Yeah, I've seen Tara's question as well about information available.
Yeah.
When I got diagnosed, the first thing I was given was a big book from Lymphoma Action, and I remember reading it from cover to cover. CAR-T was in that, and obviously I didn't know that I was going to be going down that route at the time. And then similarly, Sophie, I remember seeing something in the news about CAR-T and thinking, I wonder if I'll have that, and I did. So my hospital don't really know much about CAR-T locally. I'm in Colchester in Essex, but I was put in contact with UCLH, so they know everything about CAR-T. So there was sometimes it was a little bit, I felt not a go-between, because obviously the hospitals talk to each other, but I am very much a guinea pig for Colchester, because they've never really sent, I think they'd had one other person go for it and one other person since me go for it. So it's quite new for them. So if I have questions, they're not the people I need to ask, it's UCLH I have to ask. So then I'm actually having multiple calls with different people every couple of months and saying the same thing. So yes, I think there was a lot of information, but I think because it's new, I still think there's a lot of people to learn, and obviously some professionals I'd speak to and say, I'm having CAR-T, and it's still, oh, what's that? So it's not so known still, and there's lots that I think could probably still be shared. But as personally as a patient, I got lots of support, lots of help, and yeah, I couldn't fault it really.
Is that the same for you, Sophie? Did you find you had enough information? Did you know who to contact if you had questions? Did you know, for example, about leukemia care before you got diagnosed?
Yeah, so I did have quite a bit of information. The hospital were very good. I also found there was a really good YouTube video. It was a TED talk, and it was called something like How to Biohack Your Cells. And it was about CAR-T, and it was the most amazing way to display it. It was brilliant. I used to show it to anyone who asked me what it was. I used to show them this video, and it was a really exciting way to share with people what the treatment is. But yeah, I actually remember calling Leukemia Care myself and telling them I've been told I need this treatment, and I've been told there's nothing else. Is this right? And I don't remember who I spoke to, but they said, like, you know, obviously it's a really new and exciting treatment, but there were other antibody treatments, immunotherapies that could have worked. But yeah, I remember making that call and just being very panicked. But yeah, very good information from the hospital, and any questions I was very comfortable to ask them. We already had quite a good relationship by then, so yeah, I always felt comfortable to ask. And it's been nice now to be at a point where people approach me like strangers online, and they'll say, I've seen that you've had this treatment and I want to ask these questions, because sometimes, you know, there are things that you don't want to ask your doctor. There are things that you might think are trivial. One thing that I wanted to ask someone was, am I going to lose my hair again? Because it had been so traumatizing to lose it already twice before. And, you know, thankfully I didn't. But yeah, like little things, and to be able to do that for other people now, it's really, really nice and rewarding to do that.
I have to, that's why I wrote my blog, is because I couldn't find that much about CAR T, and I just thought, oh, I'm gonna write everything and I will share absolutely everything. I mean, I look back now, I thought, oh, that was brave sharing that bit. But I think because people, they do get embarrassed, or they don't know what's trivial. I think I've asked UCH more questions post CAR T than pre, because now it's things like, oh, they've told me to be careful in the sun. I'm like, oh, does that mean whenever I leave the front door, it's wearing factor 50? And I go, no, it's not that. So I'm now asking them more, and that's probably stuff that I do need to add to the blog at some point. But it was, you know, what do you pack? What do you pack to go to hospital for 5 weeks?
Yeah.
So I've put everything in there, because there's so much to think about, and it is daunting, and the last thing you want to do is be a nuisance. So yeah, it's definitely helpful.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I just remember trying to search CAR T like on, you know, social media, and trying to find someone my age who had been through it, and there was no one. I could just find, you know, very, very young children, and yeah, there was no one. It was quite lonely because there was no one to give me the answers that I was looking for. So now to be able to do that for others, it's really nice.
And thanks for doing it. So I don't think we have more questions. I don't know if anyone wants to share final words before we go offline.
Can I just add something?
Of course.
You two are very brave to bring this kind of experience, because one, of your age, you have you have long lives ahead of you, hopefully now, because of the success of this treatment. And you're putting it out there and letting people know that you've been through this awful, awful experience, and are choosing to use this negativity into something positive. And I find that always very brave and courageous. And you may not feel that way. I know that you feel like you're just sharing, but really it is a brave thing to do. There are many people that move on from these experiences by pretending it never happened, instead of trying to help people that come later. And I'm so touched by your stories, truthfully. And obviously I worked in hematology a long time, and I've heard lots of patient stories, but it never fails to impress on me how far science has come, and how lucky we are to live in the time that we do, where we have access now to all these different crazy, sometimes sounding therapies that are actually prolonging life and curing people that perhaps would not have had this opportunity not so long ago. Now, we know CAR T doesn't work for everybody, but it's good to see that we have fabulous stories like yours where everything has worked well, but still lots of work to do. But thank you for your partnership. And
yeah, I agree. Thanks for sharing your story. Right, I think we are now at the end of the hour. So as I said before, if there are any questions that you didn't want to ask, you can always email us or me, and I would push that question to our speakers. The recording is going to be made available on the Alan website, on the Alan Facebook, and I guess seeing Lorna nodding, probably on the Lymphoma Coalition website as well. So thanks to our speakers today. Again, I can just agree to what Lorna said, very touching. You didn't see me cry, but I think now I'm definitely going to cry. Thanks for your courage to share your story. I guess it also brings back not always nice memories. So thanks for doing that. And Lorna, thanks for being with us. You are very busy, we all know that. And thanks for giving us this very comprehensive presentation. So I thank you everyone also online for spending the hour with us.